Faza'il A'mal, More Trouble Than It's Worth, Part 16. Misunderstanding Imam Abdul Aziz Dahlawi, Misclaims and Misquotes.
Divided between traditional Islam and liberal Islam. With all the problems that one may feel with traditional Islam, whatever problems you may feel that exist. But anyhow, for an average Muslim, it would be agreed upon that traditional Islam is far better than any version of liberal Islam, no doubt. So in this sense, to make a podcast talking against probably the largest educational Islamic institute.
Hello, here Sheikh Umar Baloch, continuing with his quote-unquote defense of the Deoband movement, is responding to the Mad Mamluks in criticizing them by saying, why did you do this podcast despite all the problems that we have and despite all the issues we have, the dichotomy between traditional Islam and liberal Islam. Traditional Islam is always better. You know, he says a whole couple of things that we need to unpack. We don't really have time to unpack it, but the question and the one thing that he and the Deoband as a whole do not understand is the reason Muslims go to liberal Islam is because they are absolutely disgusted with the thing you call traditional Islam. When you go through the Curate's Egg series, which is found on the Gletkin Rubishov channel, there are claims of bestiality, paedophilia, pederasty, all manner of inappropriate homoerotic desire. These things are open for all to see, and if that's what you're promoting, then it's no surprise they go to liberal Islam. The other thing he states, which is quite important in this little segment, is he says this is the largest movement, one of the largest movements. That's exactly why we study it, and that's exactly why we look at it. This movement, this monster shouldn't be so big so that we cannot rein it in. So many things could be said about the statements of these people, but it just shows you how out of touch they are with reality. Anyway, let's continue. Now we come to this instance, which is found on page 272, and we take this from our backbone work, which is the work by Dr. Younis Al-Turkistany. And this gives you an insight into exactly how Sheikh Muhammad Zakaria used his source works. So there's one scholar called Abdul Aziz Dahlawi, and I'll just read it to you, but you should pause, read, grasp, apply, persist, achieve. This is note number 699. There was a researcher at the time of the author who also confirmed this result, i.e. that this particular hadith was fabricated or da'if. He wrote a letter about this hadith and requested that the author omits the hadith from his book. So Sheikh Zakaria said aforetime, write to me and I'll think about it. So people do write to him because this movement is burgeoning, and there's many followers that are submitting to the literature, and they're reading it, and they're blindly accepting it. Zakaria declined, saying the book Majalis al-Abrar can be trusted and is considered as a source, since it was praised by Imam Abdul Aziz Dahlawi. And there is the footnote which I've mentioned before, page 75 to 76. So here's the key part. In fact, the author's response reflects the strategy of leniency which he adopts. Also, his justification that Majalis al-Abrar, which was written by a mystic called Rumi, who died in 1631 in the Christian era, the fact that he has been praised by Abdul Aziz Dahlawi is not enough, in our opinion, for the hadith to be accepted, as Rumi himself, the book's author, mentioned the hadith without a chain of narration, no isnad, nor did he impose upon himself the need to mention any authentic ahadith. He made no such claim at all. And if he did, then the nature of some of the hadith in his book would have contradicted that claim. Besides, Dahlawi praised the book in general, so it's a generic sort of praise. So his statement should not mean more than the original intent, as if to say all the hadith in the book is authentic. So this is quite a detailed, you have to read this for yourself. This he did not say. So Zakaria swats away this criticism and simply says such and such scholar praises it, so that's why I'm going to use it. But when you scratch the surface, that hadith has no merit to be any form of authentic source or any form of valid resource that should be used in this field. Enough with the FA, enough with the TJ. Now we come to James Robson, and again I've already mentioned the two theses that we'll be looking at, so it's taken variously from those two sources. The first thing is, I'll give you some of the pedigree of James Robson. So Professor James Robson, he was born in 1890 and he was educated at the Inverness Royal Academy, Stirling High School and Glasgow University at Trinity College. And he received his Doctor of Divinity from St Andrews University. He died in 1981, so he is in recent history. In his time, this shows you the extent to which he studied. He was an assistant to Hebrew professor at Glasgow University, 1915 to 1916. He served with the YMCA in Mesopotamia and India. That was in 1918. He was a lecturer in English in Lahore from 1918 to 1919. He was a missionary at Sheikh Uthman in Aden, which is in Yemen. That ended in 1926. A minister in Dunbartonshire from 26 to 28. Then a lecturer in Arabic from 1928 to 48. Then a professor of Arabic at the University of Manchester from 49 to 58. Then a member of the Glasgow University Oriental Society, which itself dissolved in 1974. Then a member of the Royal Asiatic Society, which ended in 1979. Then a member of the editorial board, which ended 1 year before his death, of the Muslim World Journal. This is the extent and the caliber of the people doing this research and the ones that we will quote. Despite all this learning, we have this observation to make about him. He had quite a strange approach to hadith. So this is taken from the contents page of the Glasgow University 1994 thesis. He said that he actually used these separate forms of criticism. They included the Quran as a standard form of criticism. Then, remember this is to measure hadith, he used the Bible as a standard form of criticism. Then he used the historical standard, the material standard, and the rational standard. So it's quite unlike how scholars of hadith that are participant observers in the field of hadith, i.e. the Muslims, would approach the topic. And certain general observations can be made about this. So there are about 5 observations. Perhaps I'll give you just one here. But one thing that the authors of the works on Robson and Burton, the first observation they had about him was, apart from Goldziher and Shat, who are very prominent, and a single reference to Nabiya Abbott in the body of the main text, even in the title, subject title of The Western Approach to Hadith, which was in 2 separate parts, he makes very little reference to any other scholars. So he's limited in quoting from his own field, the specialists in his own field of expertise. That's a general observation of these 2 scholars. And then I'll give you the second one because we still have time. Negligence of the most recent studies on the subject. So prior to the publication of his book, there were many other ideas. And if you remember back to the book we mentioned about by Muhammad Zubair Siddiqui, he was mentioning scholars like Al-Kaytani and other scholars at the time, Alois Sprenger. He was mentioning these scholars, whereas Robson had limited himself greatly. Stay tuned for many more parts.